Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be swinging through many different alternative realities in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and then battling our siblings for control of a global media empire in the final season of Succession. But before that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I've been reading more comics. Doing a lot of comics lately. That, to be honest, mostly because most of the TV I've been watching is stuff that's been going for ages and I'm still picking my way through. But yeah, I've been reading She Could Fly, which is a comic series from Dark Horse Comics by Christopher Cantwell and Martin Morazzo, which is a sort of teenage mental health story about this girl who sees a mysterious woman flying across the city and then becomes kind of fixated with this woman as a sort of the idea of being able to just fly away and escape from her life becomes increasingly appealing because it turns out she's got some mental health, suicide ideation problems, and she's trapped at home and she's struggling at school and she's having these increasingly disturbing visions whilst talking to her counsellor. And then, yeah, she starts becoming sort of fixated with this flying woman. And of course, it turns out that the flying woman is real and stole her flying equipment from a government agency as part of a mysterious conspiracy. So this slightly troubled teenager gets sort of sucked into this mysterious conspiracy and ends up, well, spoilers, I guess, but yeah, it's a sort of mostly a character story about this girl's journey through this strange world and the way that she and her family deal with her mental illness alongside, again, a government conspiracy. It's a bit of an odd story, but yeah, very well done.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. I guess it's combining, two sort of major threads. One which is a sort of, well, the right way to put it, but mundane story about kind of an ordinary person struggling with their mental health, sort of personal conflict, and then a quite high-octane extra-personal conflict involving conspiracies and secret tech, kind of melding the two together.
Christopher Cantwell is best known as a TV writer. He co-created the show *Halt and Catch Fire*, which I believe I've raved about on this very podcast before. And for the record, you should watch it. It's really good. I believe it's currently on 4OD or All 4 or whatever they're calling it, if you want to watch it in the UK with adverts. So he's very good at a sort of thoughtful, character-driven writing, and so this is him translating that across to the comic medium, I think, with, I guess, the addition of this sort of government conspiracy and flying to provide a bit of action.
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah. It sounds like a slightly different take. And I suppose, yeah, it's all about the character story, and yeah, this sounds like it's quite, what this person's going through is quite difficult, so there's a lot of scope there for, very emotive storytelling.
Yeah, but it gets quite stark. I guess it's a bit literary fiction, to be honest. It's a very sort of, literary novel handling of the sort of fantasy, very, very vaguely superhero-y tropes, in that, yes, there's this sort of lofty stuff happening, but also this girl is, struggling with the fact that her parents are increasingly considering institutionalizing her and stuff. And she, has some quite grim treatments considered for her mental health problems all the time while she's dealing with this other stuff. So yeah, it's very much sort of counterbalancing those things. As I say, it is kind of literary novel-y, I guess, the way it handles these tropes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I suppose it's similar to the way kind of magical realism brings in fantastical elements or things like that in order to elucidate a character or a political situation or something like that to kind of make it more accessible.
Yeah, and to make it, I guess, more visual or more evocative for the reader, especially in comics, I guess, where you maybe want to avoid drawing too many endless pages of people just sitting around talking. So there's the combination of the flying imagery and also occasionally the disturbing imagery of her sort of dark fantasies and stuff. There's a bit towards I think, quite close to the beginning, where she is sort of sitting in a therapist's office and staring at this cactus her therapist has on display off to the side and starts fantasizing about just shoving it into her mouth and biting down on all these spikes coming out through her face. It's quite ouch.
Yeah, that does sound unpleasant.
Yeah, obviously quite evocatively drawn by Martin Morazzo, who is a great storyteller and who also drew Ice Cream Man, a comic which I can't remember if I've mentioned on this podcast or not, but it's incredibly good. It's a sort of horror anthology series, and yeah, I would probably have recommended it to you by now if we were still doing regular recommendations. It is among the best comics currently going.
It's come up on the podcast before, but not in the sort of having a segment dedicated to it.
Yeah, so yeah, no, Martin Morazzo is very good as well, and as I say, this is a story that, even with the flying elements, could be very talky, but because he's a great storyteller, he makes it work anyway, helped by the fact that he gets to draw these flying people and occasionally horrible things.
Yeah, and I suppose flight as well is a good visual metaphor for wanting to escape from your problems or escape from yourself and fly away. I suppose there's a reason why the superpower in this one is flight, not any of the others it could be. It suits the character, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not. I guess it's not the most advanced metaphor in the world. No, she's quite weighed down. She's quite trapped. She's sort of stuck in her head, and there's this woman flying away above her, and it captures her imagination. And obviously, that's just the starting point. And then because it turns out there's a real government conspiracy behind the flight, it all becomes a lot more complicated. But yeah,
I believe even Heroes had Peter Petrelli begins with his dreams of flying to escape from his mental health problems. Yeah, so flight as a metaphor, escape as a common metaphor.
yeah, but no, I think it's well handled here by Cantwell. This comic. It seemed to fly a bit under the radar, but they did do 3 volumes of it, and it does have an ending. I do slightly wonder if they maybe wanted slightly more volumes, because the third one maybe feels a tiny bit like it's rushing to get to an end, but at least they got to an ending. So yeah, it's pretty good. It's available. If people want to have a look, I do recommend it.
Sounds good.
So, Alistair, what have you got?
So I've sort of got a 2-part recommendation this time. The main recommendation is I'd like to, encourage everyone to participate in the Sci-Fi London Film Festival, which is happening right now. It's a independent film festival based in London across a few venues showcasing like independent and non-English language science fiction films. You know, there's also various talks and art installations and stuff around it. So yeah, it's just something I'd encourage people to get involved with. It's a cool little festival and needs your support. Unfortunately, by the time you listen to this, it will be over. So it's kind of a recommendation for next year's festival. It's a 2-part recommendation because I'd also like to recommend a specific film I saw, which is the film Phil 1.618, which the very mathematical amongst you will realise that's the golden ratio. It's a very, very strange Bulgarian science fiction film sort of set in a dystopia where these sort of immortal beings are building a spaceship to blast off into space and leave the Earth behind. And one of them who reads a book that comes to life and then goes on a quest out into the kind of dystopian world around their spaceship. And it's just full of lots of strange, music, cuts to animation, has these bizarre bits. There's lots of like references to sort of Soviet imagery and sort of Soviet filmmaking. It's just absolutely, completely mad off its rocker. But it is, if you can track down a copy of this film, it's worth watching for the sheer madness of it.
Okay, and is this a film that's available widely to our lovely listeners?
Honestly, probably not. But,
Okay.
but it's one of the...
Alistair's been to a film festival again, everybody. Recommending things you can't watch.
Yeah, bit of a deep cut. But yeah, if it comes around on a screaming? If it comes around...
That's the title of a heavily metaphorical horror film about our streaming times, I believe.
Yeah.
Streaming service.
Streaming service, yeah.
It's coming directly into your home.
There is a horror-only streaming platform, and it is not called Screaming Service, which I feel is a missed opportunity. I can't actually remember what it's called. Yeah, if it comes to a streaming service, such as probably Mubi, something like near you, it's worth watching, the way it plays with the visuals from, old Soviet films and old Soviet cartoons and things like that. Wherever they filmed this film, they found some amazing, barren, bleak landscapes filled with, sort of decaying Soviet architecture. So it's stunning to look at. Yeah, it does make Bulgaria look like quite grim and post-Soviet. It's a really interesting, inventive film, which is one of the things I really like about the festival, is you find stuff that's really like pushing the boundaries, doing interesting, unusual things, not feeling constrained by conventions of Hollywood just to make really, really like out there, strange sci-fi films. So it's a good chance to try something new.
Okay, so next year, check out the Sci-Fi London Film Festival.
Yeah, it's usually about 10 or so films. There's lots of good stuff going on. They do events throughout the year as well. But the film festival rolls around usually every May, June. So it's something I'd recommend because I'd like to see this keep going. I was a bit worried it would become a victim of the pandemic, after disappearing for several years. But I think it was back last year, and it's back this year with a good programme of films. I'm seeing 2 more films at the festival that I'll have seen by the time the podcast comes out. So head over to the MFV Twitter feed to find out what I thought of those.
There you go, guys. Follow us on social media. Okay, and the first up today of 2 quite big releases of this year, it's Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, the sequel, of course, to Into the Spider-Verse from a few years ago. This is the animated movie following a whole range of spider people, but focusing on Miles Morales, a young kid from Brooklyn who's just become his universe's Spider-Man, and is now also aware that there's a whole universe of other spider people out there. In this film, he is reunited with Gwen Stacy, the Spider-Woman of a different universe, who was in the previous film, and then from there introduced to a whole secret society of spider people, led by the ominous Spider-Man 2099, Miguel O'Hara, who soon reveals that Miles is actually a problem in the Spider-Verse, an anomaly who they must correct, because of course they are a secret society governing the multiverse who have to keep things on track. and thus conflict develops. This is, of course, the sequel to a massively acclaimed film that is credited with being, among other things, the best Spider-Man film, the best superhero film, full stop, one of the best animated films in the history of the genre. Yeah, I think it won the best animated movie Oscar and everything. So, big spider shoes to try and fill. Alistair, how was it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of hype and a lot of expectation here, and I would say for the most part, it hits the ball out of the park. It was a real roller coaster of entertainment. It's quite long. I think it's 2 hours 20. Considering this is a film sort of at least nominally aimed at children, or at least that's what the exhibitors thought it is based on the trailers they showed beforehand. But yeah, it is really it's well paced. It's very entertaining. It's beautiful to look at. I thought my favorite thing about it was definitely the art direction and how amazing the animation was and the colors and the different ways the animation was used, which we can go into in some detail. But also it's got a great script with humor punctuating action and a nice character story at the core of it. So in terms of blockbuster entertainment, this is a film that's firing on all cylinders.
Yeah. No, it's a sequel to Into the Spider-Verse, which is a more of the same sequel with a heavy emphasis on more. They haven't just sort of trotted on and done another one. They've gone a lot harder on it. There's more Spider-Men, more animation effects, more action, more length, more drama. And it kind of works, again, because it doubles down and digs deeper on the multiverse stuff, but also actually does spend a lot of time on the civilian lives of the characters. All the stuff that's in the trailers with the Spider Society and the many, many Spider people, that's actually quite a way into the film. There's a good hour and a half even, with just Miles and his family, the individual Spider-Person in the individual universe, before we get into multiverse craziness time. So yeah, it's a very grounded story in the way that I think, a good Spider-Man story kind of has to be. But also, amazing amounts of animation effects, Spider people and multiverse shit. So yeah, no, I love this, predictably. This is my shit to an obnoxious degree, and it's very pleasing to me that something which is this much my shit, very specifically, as a teenage Spider fan, has also turned out to be apparently everyone's shit and is widely recognised as some of the best superhero films.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been well received. There's a lot of good buzz around it. The cinema was absolutely packed last night when I saw it.
Yeah, same. I mean, sort of coming off what you said about it being nominally aimed at kids, it's quite a slow, talky movie, I think.
Especially at the beginning.
I mean, it's basically, to be honest, it's a very, apart from maybe toning down the violence a tiny bit, it's kind of quite similar to a lot of the other 12A superhero films in terms of the way it's plotted and written, in terms of the number of quite quiet, character-driven scenes. So, yeah, I think by the end of 2 hours, 20 minutes of this, quite a few of the kids in my audience were struggling with their ability to sit still and or urinate.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually surprised by how undisruptive the children in my screening were. I was a bit worried because when I knew the length, there was quite a few sort of younger children, definitely under 10s in the screening, but, there was, despite a few clearly popping out to the toilet, their attention was pretty much held the whole time. I mean, I think sometimes we really underestimate what children will sit through, and actually they are quite perceptive and good at following plot and good at building up character relations if the story is well told. And there's a lot of accessible drama to people of all ages in it. There's both Gwen and Miles are struggling with a secret identity, keeping things from their parents. It's the classic coming of age story when you become your own person separate from your family and realize you have to strike out your own life, have a life separate from your parents, and they know that they have to let you go but also want to hold you because they don't want that to happen. And obviously it's done through the metaphor of having a secret life as a superhero, but it's very accessible teenage drama, and it's a very accessible emotional story at the core of this, which I think is what people are relating to.
I mean, yeah, from that point of view, it's a very sort of YA, I guess. It's a sort of coming-of-age YA story. And that sort of extends to the multiverse stuff, because obviously trying my best to thread the needle around spoilers, but obviously a lot of what Miguel O'Hara's organisation is doing is sort of maintaining the canon and keeping the multiverse in order. And, that's very much ties into the central metaphor from Miles Morales' personal story of, growing up and becoming your own person instead of doing what other people / your parents / the masters of the multiverse think you should do.
Yeah, it's a sort of fairly standard YA character arc. You might say it's archetypal. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why dystopia is so popular for YA, from the Hunger Games, the Maze Runner or whatever, because, it's the classic, you must learn to do what you think's right, not what everyone tells you is right, which is the plot arc here.
Yeah, it's a fairly standard, as you say, YA moral about breaking free and doing your own thing, but it's a cartoon coming-of-age story, what do you expect? And also, with a story with this much just shit going on, because for all I just said about this film sometimes being a bit sedate, sedate. The sedate moments are usually followed by a period of stuff that's absolutely manic. Like, incredibly fast moving action, stuff just flying at you, swirling colours kind of everywhere. And when you've got that much going on screen, when it's this busy in terms of, the aesthetic of it, the fact that it actually has a fairly strong, straightforward story about, Miles Morales coming of age and becoming his own person is, I think, beneficial and does let you then bolt on all the stupid jokes about spider horses that you want.
Yeah. I mean, that's all very funny, though, as well. Like, again, exploring some of the dafter side of Spider-Man. I assume some of these are canon from various, like, I don't know, one-offs they've done, alternative realities or kind of joke versions of Spider-Man. For everything from, like, the spider horse to the Spider-Man with the paper bag over his head to
Peter Parked car. The Spider-Man, but also a car, yeah.
That got a big laugh.
Yeah, a lot of it is stuff from old comics. I mean, there was actually a storyline called Spider-Verse in the comics about 3 or 4 years before they did the original Spider-Verse film, and it's not really a strictly the basis of this film. This film is not a tight adaptation of that. That's a different story. For starters, it's not really a Miles Morales story. But yeah, that does introduce a lot of random Spider-Man variants as jokes, and a lot of them are recycled here, plus a lot of others from throughout the history of the character. Plus, since this stuff took off, they have done a lot of miniseries in the comics where they just introduce random Spider-Men from across the Spider-Verse. Oh, I said the thing. So yeah, they can bring in a lot of those as well. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of source material. I'm pretty sure some of them have just been made up for this film, but an impressive amount of them have appeared in at least one panel in the comic.
Yeah. And there's sort of other humorous nods that they like tie in to the film, including bringing in bits of like references to kind of the wider MCU film. They use the Amazing Spider-Man clip at one point showing through reality, I guess that's using, I don't know, live action actors.
Yeah, there's bits from the live action movies. There's a couple of live action cameos I feel bad spoiling.
And yeah, when elucidating that every Spider-Man has an Uncle Ben death or similar moment. But also, to be fair, the humour, there's some quite sophisticated bits. Like, one of my favourite bits actually is kind of the opening sequence is a fight between Spider-Gwen and the Vulture in the Guggenheim. And there's like a Jeff Koons exhibition and there's like a lot of jokes about Jeff Koons. Which is, I suppose it's aimed at the grown-ups or whatever, but I think there's quite a sophisticated humour. Like, there's a bit, I mean, this takes a little bit of explaining. It's right at the beginning of the film, so it's not much of a spoiler, but it's like, there's a Renaissance version of the Vulture, and he's disgusted by modern art, and there's various things about Spider-Gwen saying it's kind of more of a commentary on what art should be rather than art, which is also art, which is, I don't know, that's just thrown into the middle of like, a colourful action sequence. And then there's a Banksy joke later on.
Yeah, I got the Banksy joke.
Yeah. I was a bit like, I was like, I don't know, Jeff Koons, I don't know. He's a well-known, like, postmodern artist, but at the same time, it's not the most accessible thing they could have included.
I mean, there is a certain sort of obvious artiness to this film. Like, although yes, it does have its relatable YA storyline and everything we already said. The art style and the range of art styles and the incredibly amazing way it looks is another part of the appeal. I gather the official art book of this film sells quite well.
Yeah, I'd love a copy of that, yeah. And I think it's because, and this is something they picked up from the first film, that each reality has its own art style, which just really helped telling you kind of where you are, that you're in a different universe, which is really useful, just like visual storytelling metaphor. But it also means that the film is so vibrant and colourful. Like Spider-Gwen's universe is kind of like, looks like it's been painted. Miles Morales' universe is a sort of graffiti kind of style design to the art, but we've added closer and closer to 3D realism. There's a very kind of sketch style when they go to a kind of version where it's kind of Manhattan crossed with Mumbai. The colours are like breaking out of like the sketches for the for the buildings and things like that. The Renaissance Vulture looks like a Leonardo da Vinci sketch that's come to life. There's the sort of cyber suit anime style Spider-Man who's done a sort of Japanese style.
Yeah, there was a sort of hyper detailed cyborg Spider-Man. There was various sort of more cartoony ones. There was a sequence. I feel bad spoiling that because that's a very good joke. But there's some very good sequences with different animation styles. Yeah, there's Ben Reilly, my beloved Ben Reilly from the Clone Saga, which I was reading when I got into Spider-Man comics. I will admit he's not really very canonically accurate. He's mostly used just as a general joke about extreme angsty 90s characters. But the joke is funny, so I'll let them have it.
That was funny.
I'm just happy to see him on screen.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the range of different universes and the fact they really allowed the animation team or probably teams to like go completely nuts with like their particular style really gives this thing just such a beautiful colour palette, and it's just gorgeous to look at, which keeps entertaining. But something you really appreciate, the level and the detail that's gone into the art. They're not constrained by the need to be like create something that looks necessarily realistic. There's some very abstract bits, especially when it gets quite emotional, like the relationship between Spider-Gwen and her father, the paint gets kind of, the details disappear, it becomes much more abstract, but it brings out the emotion, which I really liked.
Yeah, like during the final emotional confrontation, but Spider-Gwen and her father, the colours like full on wash out at times. It's very... It's in some ways quite an odd effect to do in the middle of this quite quiet emotional scene, and I guess it's a credit to A, the press that they've established, and B, the massive skill of the artists involved, that it completely works.
Yeah. And there's also one I particularly like, there's Spider-Punk, or a punk Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, who is a constantly sort of shifting collage of...
Well, is it a sort of zine? Punk zine thing, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like punk zine, and it's, like kind of the art from like the Sex Pistols and the Clash early albums and things like that, with sort of punk attitude and carrying a guitar everywhere. Yeah, I did appreciate Spider-Punk.
Yeah, no, Spider-Punk was funny. Daniel Kaluuya doing extreme London slang. Enjoyed that. I'm sure the Americans will get something from it, assuming they can understand it.
Yeah. Reminder that Daniel Kaluuya is British, despite the fact he's done quite a lot of like high-profile American films like Get Out. I mean, the voice cast in this is really good as well. Oscar Isaacs is one of the villains.
As Spider-Man 2099, yeah.
Yeah. There's obviously lots of returning people from the first film who are still very good. And there's a few surprise voice appearances that, again, I don't feel the need to spoil. But I really think the voice cast is doing great work here.
Yeah. And I must admit, although he didn't mean as much to me as Ben Reilly, I did enjoy seeing Spider-Man 2099 on screen. His design is amazing. I'm a big fan of the costume design for that character. Yeah, the original 90s series is actually really, really good. He's not a villain in that, but still, he's enough of a slightly harder-edged Spider-Man that you could sort of get away with this interpretation.
I mean, but also similar to the best of the superhero films in the MCU and things like that, he's not like a pantomime villain. He's coming from a perspective, he's got a story that's filled in very deftly about his family dying. He's trying to preserve order to save other people's families from dying and universes being destroyed. He comes from a sort of relatable position. It's not like Steppenwolf in the Justice League, he's just like evil for evil's sake.
Yeah, and there's a whole other film with this to come. I would not be entirely surprised if Spider-Man 2099 maybe gets filled out a bit and becomes more sympathetic. Either that or he goes off the deep end entirely and becomes a supervillain. I guess we'll wait and see.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is something we want to drop like a spoiler wall on, but I guess there is, obviously this is part one of two-part.
I don't really need to describe the ending in depth. I'm happy to say that, yes, this is a two-part film with a cliffhanger.
Yeah. And I guess if I had a criticism of it, I do feel that, like, it did feel a bit, like, sudden. And I think the comparison to make is that, like, Avengers Infinity War did kind of have a sort of conclusive ending whilst also setting up the sequel. It kind of managed to do both, finishing its story and creating a new one, whereas I felt that this one didn't really finish its story, which I think I would prefer something more definitive.
I mean, it's half a film. It is. It's not. Yeah, Avengers Infinity War managed to feel a bit more like a two-part film with two films with a cliffhanger bridging them. Whereas, yes, this is half a film. But then again, Dune did it and we let them off.
There's also a good point.
So, yeah, it's no more or less half a film than Dune was, I feel. So, if that annoys you, then that annoys you. But it doesn't annoy me.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see, what comes next.
Yeah, also the sound was weirdly quiet in places. And I have seen other people complaining about this on Twitter. So, I don't think it's just me. To the point that I think one of the producers, writers behind the film actually did a tweet sort of semi-encouraging people to ask their cinema to turn the sound up. So yeah, possible they may have fucked up the mixing, especially during the early bit set in Gwen Stacy's universe. There you go, there's something to think about while you're watching it.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was wondering if it was just my hearing just been ruined. But the voices are quite low in the mix, which is actually a problem I find with modern TV shows as well. Yeah,
it's something I occasionally notice on TV, but normally one of the few things I enjoy about going to the cinema, because I love the public, is the fact that the voices are usually fairly clear and the good sound system means I can normally understand everything everyone's saying. But in this occasion, no, I was a bit sort of, on a few lines of dialogue.
It doesn't really, I think, affect your enjoyment of the film in that I was kind of like carried away. Our entire screen of people were thoroughly entertained. And I think that especially the build-up with, kind of really laying the character work, especially for Spider-Gwen as well. There's like, you get a kind of a long build-up of Spider-Gwen and then a long build-up of Miles Morales. Really like lays a very solid foundation for this film that you really understand these characters, their relationship, the drama that's going on in their life. And then by building that foundation, when they kind of go into like interdimensional Spider-Verse, Spider-Man on Spider-Man action, you've kind of got that character base and kind of dramatic base there that kind of was what carries you through the rest of the film.
Well, yeah, although a lot of the publicity from this film is obviously building heavily around the sort of Technicolor, splashy, multi-animation style fighty stuff. It's not just noise, 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 scream, scream, scream. The fact that all the character stuff is also there is partly also probably one of the reasons this film is so long. But in fairness, it's also one of the reasons it works and is good. So
yeah.
There we go.
And they sort of build up the colour stuff in stages. Like it starts with just Gwen in her reality, then she meets the Vulture, who's got a different animation style, and then they kind of add it layer and layer until eventually you get to the point when there's like 1,000 Spider-Men, each with their own animation style, chasing after Miles Morales.
Yes, as seen in the trailer.
Yeah.
Part of me was slightly disappointed, and I always feel vaguely bad criticising films because of what was in the trailers, so this isn't really a criticism of the movie, but I was quite surprised how late in the film a lot of that, like, loads of Spider-Men chasing Miles stuff was, considering it's in all the trailers. So I was sort of assuming that, based on the art of fair and balanced trailering, that would mean that would be, sort of first act, early second act, and then there would be quite a lot of film left after that, but...
Yeah.
I don't know. Mild spoilers, I guess. Once you've got to the many Spider-Men chasing Miles, you are a fair chunk of the way through the film. That's kind of one of the last, like, really big action sequences.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. That's what sort of thing the film kind of builds to.
I mean, fair enough. I mean, it's a massive sequence, and it does justify itself as the big end pinnacle of this film. But, yeah, I don't know. Just because the trailer spotlighted it a fair amount, I was kind of expecting there to be a bit more after. But that is probably not the film's fault, and I don't know what they'd have put in the trailer if they tried to pretend this bit wasn't there.
Well, it's sort of the selling point of the film, isn't it? So, yeah, more Spider-Man, more different realities. So,
yeah, it is what it is to an extent, and maybe that's kind of the problem with this only being half a film. That means they have more time to do a lot of slow build-up, but that also means there's less big, cool stuff in the first half of the film for them to put in the trailer.
Yeah.
Maybe now I think about it, I do emphasise with the PR department a bit more. Sorry, guys.
It's not always the easiest job, I suppose, to work out how you're going to sell a film without spoiling it.
But yeah, anyway, these are our worst criticisms. Yeah, the film's really good. Go see the film.
I definitely encourage people to see it. And I think it's impressive that it entertains an audience of all ages. I really liked the humour, I must say. There's there's kind of a lot of good jokes and things like that. There's a lot of running jokes about tautologies. For example, when they go to the India reality and Miles says chai tea and the guy's like, that's just tea. Do you want some coffee with cream?
The Indian Spider-Man stuff was great, yeah.
Yeah, it was very good, yeah. There's a few other jokes as well, yeah. There's a lot of jokes about interdimensional holes, and the repetition of holes just becomes hilarious.
Yeah, no, a fair play to them for making the Spot into a big deal villain in a film. I mean, I see why. Obviously, his sort of portal Spot power is very compatible with the premise of this film, but it's impressive. I know we've had a lot of superhero films, and especially a lot of Spider-Man films, so we're going to be getting into maybe some deeper cut villains, but the fact that we've now reached the Spot is impressive.
I think the Spot's power of creating kind of like these holes that are sort of absences looks much better animation in reality. I don't know, it'd be a difficult thing to visualize in a kind of 3D realistic animation style or like live action style, whereas within the sort of slightly abstract Spider universe, kind of having these sort of like holes that people just fall through, these absences, works much better.
Yeah, I agree. This is probably, I mean, I guess don't count anything else. Who knows what they could do with AI nowadays, but probably the best cinematic portrayal of the Spot you'll ever see. Okay, and on to our second major cultural event of the year this episode. It's the final season of Succession, the dark comedy drama on HBO written by Jesse Armstrong, following, of course, the succession crisis of the Roy family. This is a sort of Murdoch-esque media dynasty whose patriarch, Logan Roy, played by Brian Cox, is increasingly growing old, his health is failing, and the question of who's going to succeed him is coming up. And his children, primarily Kendall, played by Jeremy Strong, Shiv, played by Sarah Snook, and Roman, played by Kieran Culkin, are squabbling and increasingly actively backstabbing over who will be the one chosen special child. And yes, this is the fourth season. The internecine battles have been going on for a solid 3 years now, and in this final year, it all comes to a head. For the record, we were a bit careful about spoilers in Spider-Verse. I think we might have to spoil at least some of the things that happen in this season to talk about it meaningfully. We'll maybe drop a spoiler wall before talking in detail about the finale, but yeah, there's at least a couple of things that happen in the early parts of this season which might get spoiled quite quickly. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, yeah. I mean, most people probably at least know the big events that drop around episode 3 at this point.
So if you really haven't seen any of Succession Season 4 and you are deeply concerned about spoilers, then yeah, fair, leg it. I mean, broad review, I liked it. But if you want to hear more, then come back when you've watched it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, with that in mind, Alistair, what did you think of the final season of Succession?
So there were some very high stakes for the show, as it's like very popular and been very well received, and there was a lot of expectation around the ending. And I would say not only did they rise to expectations, but in my view they exceeded expectations. I mean, the finale, well, especially the run of the last 3 episodes, which cover the election, the funeral, and the finale itself. Just each one is just so tense, and the tension is just racketed up higher and higher until the ending. So yeah, I think they did a really good job, considering there's quite a lot of characters, especially the supporting cast, and there's quite a lot of plot threads, and how they managed to bring it all together and then focus it down at the end to the core question of succession, and still create this incredibly tense family drama. It's really something that's quite impressive. They managed to pull all this off.
Yeah, I think by ending this after only 4 years, they managed to bring it in quite tightly and focus in, on the core point, which is still the relationship between the main 3 siblings, which, especially the final episode, was very much one of the only really real things on screen, and it clearly brought in all the things that had happened over the last few years. And yeah, the fundamental succession beat, the thing that they've always done in most of their episodes over the course of the 4 years, has been this sort of snapping wildly from these humanising moments where you start to think, oh, maybe this particular Roy sibling isn't so bad, to shortly later, or sometimes the next episode, where they do something so selfish and mean that you start to wonder why you ever thought that. And yet it's somehow still feeling like a coherent character, because a lot of the weakness of these characters is their inability to resist the temptation to bite back against anything they perceive as a slight, or anything they see as them seeming inferior to someone else. So it's often just that continued failure to rise above their flaws. And this season does a particularly good job of really epitomising that, because, and again, here comes that early season event spoiler. Here it comes. Here it is. Obviously, Logan Roy dies. The key event that triggers the succession happens quite early in this season, in episode 3 out of 10, which is both the obvious best thing to do and somehow a surprise, because you kind of expect them to drag out having Brian Cox on screen for as long as possible.
Yeah, because they've got Brian Cox, and he's great in the role.
So yeah, I was kind of expecting them to stall that till episode 6, 7, but no, he's gone by episode 3.
Yeah, despite a few appearances on flashbacks and video screens, they managed to keep him around a bit. But also they managed to keep it quite secret. They didn't reveal any of the trailers and stuff, that the majority of the plot of the season would be, who's succeeding him after his death. And the fact they managed to sit on that, I think, is quite impressive. And then so it is a surprise when the death scene kind of comes out of the blue. Yeah.
I mean, for the record, this show doesn't actually do flashbacks. It's one of their things, isn't it? There's no flashbacks. He's just occasionally there's a bit of footage of him, which is archival within the show.
Yeah, actually, that is on the money, yeah.
Sorry, that was just pedantry.
No, but you're all right, yeah. You're completely right.
But yeah, the point is, Logan dies with a non-trivial amount of episodes left. And his death gives a lot of scope for the characters to, appear human. There's nothing more rawly human than them grieving their dead parents, which, for at least an episode or two, and occasionally again throughout the rest of the season, they do actually sincerely have to do that. And therefore it does, if anything, let them do the succession beat of, oh, they seem all right. Oh no, they're a monster. Again and again with increasing sharpness, because it goes from them grieving their parents to them doing things that possibly effectively doom the country when we get to the election sequence towards the end.
Yeah, and then they even have the penultimate episode being based around the funeral, which obviously, when emotions run highest, but also at some point, because you think people having a genuine emotional response to the death of their parent, but also they're leveraging it for power, because it's a public event, the death of someone so well known and powerful. So they're leveraging it for their public perception and for their power relationships within the family. So even though they're kind of grieving, they're also, I think at one point, Roman says to Kendall, oh, so you're wearing sunglasses so no one sees you crying, therefore you win the funeral. And but also weirdly, Kendall does kind of win the funeral by giving the best eulogy and really setting himself up as the successor in the public eye.
Yeah, and also in the funeral episode there's a lot of vague hinting about the things that are going on in the world outside the tiny rich person planet of these characters in reaction to the election result, which they engineered in the previous episode. And it seems like the American society might be crumbling, but these rich people are fine because they can still get limoed from place to place. It's a very interesting bit of world building, which is never really fully addressed by the end of the show, because that's not what we care about, which almost makes you complicit in the sort of sad little, do the small people really matter attitude that these people have.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two levels that it works on, in the sense that it's just about a character dynamics. It's, people squabbling over their inheritance and trying to kind of win the approval of a father who was a tough man. He either didn't love them or like was very bad at saying it. You could have written this story and have it about any family business. It could be about a car showroom, and it could be just as intense, and the emotional stakes are just as high. But because this is a global media empire, they've also weaved into the fact that like who is in charge matters, because they can bring down governments, they can shake economies with the power that they have. So yeah, they'll go from people arguing over who's the person that their father loved the most, which again could apply to any family or any business, to then to like, well, saying if Roman takes over, he might enable fascism, and have the power to do it. Yeah, and then they weave in big events, like there's the election episode's very tense because again it's more of a workplace drama than like a family drama in that, and the workplace is the media organization that can influence elections. And also I really did enjoy, Stroke was horrified by the election plot line with the character of Jared Mencken, the introduced, who is a plausible American fascist. And I quite like the fact they didn't just make him a Donald Trump parody. He's not like Trump at all, even though he's incredibly right-wing xenophobic, but he's not that kind of blustering, also slightly figure of fun that Mencken is. Like, yeah, he's reserved, he's cool, he's kind of corporate. Cool is in the sense of like he doesn't get raffled. He's not like a pantomime villain as Trump can veer into. He's got this sort of statesman-like but also extremely right-wing views, and like is willing to stir up kind of lies and hatred at his opposition. So I think there's a lot of research going into what would a plausible American fascist be like, and Mencken is that.
Well, yeah, like there's a lot of talk during the Trump presidency about what would the worst thing than Trump be, which is, somebody who has similar views, but, is actually capable of appearing like a plausible president. Yeah,
and doesn't have like wild mood swings and also complete disengagement from hard work, which Trump has, yeah. So yeah, and they have Mencken in the background, the fact that, in some levels, he looks like a regular politician, but also in some levels he's clearly, a fascist. And more so, like, engaged in misinformation, manipulation, cast doubt on the democratic process. His supporters are like, there's all sorts of things in the background, his supporters engaging in voter intimidation and things like that. So yeah, and that's sort of weaved in. And then again, it's brought back to the characters by the fact that Roman, who's a sort of edgelord, provocateur type, likes Mencken, because he just doesn't care about people and just hates snooty liberals like his sister. Shiv, obviously, as the liberal character, is very opposed to Mencken, but in a kind of damning indictment of liberal corporate America, Shiv is completely willing to sell out her principles if Mencken will support her in becoming the successor. Just completely disregards all of her views about his extreme right-wing politics as soon as it's beneficial to her. So yeah, there's a lot of high-level political satire going on here that I very much enjoyed.
Yeah, Roman throughout this final season, full disclosure, my big spoiler bets for the final season, which turned out to be wrong. So I'm sort of anti-spoiler coming, lads. Was that Roman would not survive it, was that Roman would end up basically dead in a hotel room, because his obvious clawing self-loathing and increasing disinterest in the life he'd been stuck with would just get to him and he'd just end up dead. And that does not happen. I still, for now, refrain from spoiling what does happen, but Roman does not die tragically of an overdose or anything. And I think the closest we got to that beat was in the end of episode 9, where he sort of... I'm spoiling the end of the penultimate episode now, so I guess the spoilers are mounting. Where he sort of has his little mini breakdown at the funeral and then runs out into the crowd in this riot they're having outside, or this protest, or sort of looks like it might be on the verge of becoming a riot. And there was that one bit where he runs into the crowd and then he sort of cut to the police sort of advancing on the crowd. And I was a bit sort of, oh, well, are they going to have Roman accidentally get killed by the cops or something?
Yeah, I mean, is it a possibility of he's attempting suicide by cop, or possibly suicide by angry mob?
Yeah, or even he just wants to hit some of these annoying protesting liberals because he just doesn't like them, or because he sees them as somehow the cause of his problems, and then he's going to get, accidentally shot by a cop or something.
Yeah, it's definitely a low point in the character arc of the downward spiral.
Yeah, I think ultimately, that moment was the closest I got to my, again, incorrect prophecy that Roman would not make it out of this season. But yeah, he was always clearly headed for a bit of a crash.
Yeah. But I think throughout the whole show, they kind of always did the unexpected, which is what kept the drama tense. Yeah, you sort of expected Roman to be the one who might be overwhelmed and do something really drastic at the end, but they always go in like a different direction. You think something's going to happen and then something else happens, partly because this show prioritizes dramatic tension. All the character development stuff is there just to serve to heat up the tension, and that kind of goes through until the ending when they announce the successor. And I suppose is now our point to discuss that?
Yeah, I think, considering I've now gone up to spoiling the penultimate episode, we should probably just drop our pretenses at being spoiler-free and do the ending in detail. So yeah, if you haven't seen the ending of Succession, I think we've established we both liked it, so...
Yeah.
You can go now. Here come the spoilers.
Yeah, exactly. They're sort of setting up it to be Kendall, who's the successor kind of from the first episode, or the most likely one. The oldest of Logan's children, who seems interested in being in charge. His oldest son is obviously, isn't. And you kind of expect them it to be Kendall or something similar to that, or possibly like Roman as a last minute thing. But yeah, they actually, through a last minute switch about, in a moment of dramatic tension, Tom Wanskans, who we haven't discussed so far, that's Shiv's husband, is the one who takes over. And yeah, I did not see that coming. I thought it'd be way too obvious if Kendall became the successor, but I did expect it to possibly be Shiv or maybe even Roman. But yeah, I did not expect Tom to come out as the dark horse and take it at the last minute.
I did sort of think that Matsson might Shiv, so to speak, and toss her overboard and bring in a complete puppet. But I actually thought they might go all the way to the comical, logical, stupidest conclusion and have that puppet be Greg. But no, they didn't quite go there. They had the puppet be Tom.
I think Greg's just too unrealistic that someone with that little experience would be put in charge of the world's biggest media conglomerate, even as the puppet.
Yeah, no, to be fair, yes. That was what happened, but yes, they went for Tom, who I guess has always been, as I believe Shiv sort of described him in the last episode, a pliable node who will happily just fit onto the penis of whoever's in power at the time.
Yeah, exactly. And yes, obviously, the other plot line, I mean, there's so many plot lines, we don't have time to dissect all of them, is Waystar Royco, the massive conglomerate, being acquired by a Swedish tech firm called Gojo, that's sort of Netflix plus gambling plus social media. It's kind of like TikTok, Netflix, and some kind of gambling platform rolled into one. Yeah, and whose CEO is played by Alexander Skarsgård, who's great playing a sort of tech weirdo, I don't know, lover of disruption and wreaking havoc. Yeah, and he buys the company and then puts Tom in. But also Shiv kind of enables that, which shifts the power relationship in the power dynamic in their relationship.
Shiv, and I say this with love, is an idiot, so she could maybe have seen that coming. But I think with Shiv has always sort of been that you sort of feel vaguely sympathetic towards her because she has broadly liberal views and, as you say, when it suits her, or at least she's willing to disregard them. And she occasionally experiences sexism, but she is also entirely willing to toss those views for personal gain. And also she's really actually kind of bad at a lot of the sort of political manoeuvring, but she sees herself as being good at.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know entirely what drove her to trust Lucas Matsson, a obvious conniving maniac who sends pints of blood to people.
Yeah, that's a bizarre thing. Yeah, bizarre character moment, yeah.
Yeah, kind of think it was, yes, another stupid idea by Shiv.
But also, she's on the out. Kendall becomes the interim CEO after her dad's death, so she has to take, I don't know, an unusual play to get back in, allying herself first with Lucas Madsen, crazy Swedish billionaire, and then with Jared Mencken, America's favourite fascist. It's the classic, like, she's just selling her soul. I mean, there's a lot of people in this show who have the plot line of like they just sell their soul piecemeal till there's nothing left in the hope of becoming rich and powerful, especially powerful. And that's what happens to Shiv as well. I mean, there's also the fact that like she's got this incredibly unhappy marriage to Tom, and they're both kind of horrible narcissistic people. But yeah, she's always had this like, power over him that she's richer than him and she's a Roy. But now the power dynamic is shifted in terms of Tom. So Tom, gets what he wants. He has power over his wife. He has the company. He's seeing off the other Roy children. Which is, again, I would not put money on that happening at the end, yeah.
Yeah, no, the big vote bit at the very end was incredibly tense. Like, they've had a few of these sort of, it's the big meeting beats throughout the series. And one of the only real sort of lingering criticisms of Succession I've seen has been that it can get a bit samey, you know. Another day, another vote, another bitchy exchange, another Roy sibling betrayal, another coup attempt. You know, I think that's one of the reasons why it's probably good to end it with season 4, because...
Yeah, more of this would just become tedious.
I did start to maybe slightly feel those criticisms by the end of season 3. It's like, okay, another season, very, very well written, very, very well acted, but yeah, more manoeuvring, more bitchiness, more coups, more exchanges. So when I heard it was ending with season 4, I did think, yeah, okay, good, probably for the best. One last round, another big vote, but make it a big one. Kill off the dad and we're out. So yes, I think they just about headed off that criticism for me.
Yeah, sell the company to a tech giant, so now it becomes part of his tech empire. Yeah, it's very much like it wraps it all up. And yeah, this is the point to do that. You are right, there's a lot of, all possibly permutations of alliances between the likely successor candidates, the sort of the three main Roy children, Tom, Greg, and the few other senior corporate people have been explored at this point. I think, every possible permutation's been resolved. Everyone's backstabbed everyone several times in various different ways. They kind of got one last big hurl when, for the biggest thing of, selling their father's legacy is the kind of the biggest dramatic moment after that, and that's the point to end it on. Don't continue.
Yeah, and just to mention the one Roy child we have not mentioned, Connor's also in it.
Yeah, he runs for... he's sort of very much the also ran, including when he ran for president.
Yeah, I liked the joke. I think the fundamental joke that Connor's storyline just never really mattered that much. Like, conventional TV writing makes you think there'll be a moment where his side shit kind of suddenly becomes important. Logically, I guess that would be the presidential election because he's running for president. There would be some twist where Connor suddenly becomes the power broker, the kingmaker. But No, that doesn't happen really. He's kind of in that episode, but it doesn't really matter. His wedding also happens this season. There's a couple of episodes built around events in and around his wedding. Connor still doesn't matter a huge amount. Even though he's theoretically the centre of some of those episodes, he's basically a sideshow. He does have some surprisingly lucid and emotionally intelligent moments about his father's death, and some of his wedding is oddly sweet, the few bits we see of it. But yeah, Connor, irrelevant to the end.
I mean, the interesting thing about Connor is that he has the best relationship with his father because he doesn't challenge, threaten, or really do anything to his father in any way other than just accepts whatever he says. There's various bits he was the only one who knew about his father's mausoleum plans, and he was the only one really on speaking terms with his father at the end. But, what did he gain from all of that? His father declines to attend his wedding rather to do business, so yeah.
But he's also the one who says when their father dies, oh well, he didn't really love me, did he?
Yeah, exactly. But it's again the part of the dramatic element of the show, or the theme of if you sell your soul you get really nothing for it. Connor sold his soul by just accepting anything his father said, but he gets nothing for it because he still doesn't get love or even his father attending his own wedding.
But he has grown up to be a boy sibling who doesn't live in constant, desperate, grasping fervour for daddy's approval, which is something, I guess, but he's clearly still a bit unhappy.
He's very much the Joey of Succession, in that basically the character that on the surface everyone first looks at him and goes, that guy's the biggest loser. He can't even get anything together. But also weirdly, he's probably the most emotionally healthy and emotionally intelligent, and the one who's most comfortable with himself, isn't just driven by crippling anxiety and this need to consume and succeed in order to justify their own existence. He's actually kind of the sanest of all the Roys.
Yeah, but he isn't entirely rewarded with ultimate happiness for it. There are a few slightly dark, foreboding hints about the future of his relationship with his wife in the final episode. So
I feel he's rewarded.
We'll see how that goes.
Rewarded with a moderate level of happiness, when the others are just rewarded with, I guess, apart from possibly Tom, who becoming the successor, the others are just rewarded with emotional ruin. I mean, Kendall obviously ends in the worst possible state. The last shot of the show is him standing somewhere near Battery Park, looking out of the water in film and TV being quite obvious metaphor for death and especially suicide. So yeah, it's quite obvious where Kendall is, even though they don't finish with Kendall making a noose and whatever, it's pretty obvious to say the show says this is Kendall's last act.
Yeah, I mean, he was being followed by his father's body man, wasn't he? So I guess the implication is he might not be able to kill himself on that occasion, but we'll see how we won't see how it goes, but yeah,
I think the show's fairly unambiguous about where that's going. And then the last you see of Roman is in a bar ordering a cocktail, not looking particularly happy, but also not looking particularly miserable. I guess he doesn't like his brother or his sister, and they both got fucked over at the end, so I think he feels kind of happy about that. Yeah, so actually, in anything, Roman ends up in a fairly positive place.
I think Roman had realised over the course of the final season that he didn't really want it that much and was quite miserable about the whole thing, but also possibly because it's been the driving force for a lot of his life, seemed unable to actually walk away from it, which was, again, as I say, depressing in its own way.
And obviously in the final moments, Kendall becomes physically abusive to Roman when he won't give him what he wants. I think that Roman feels better that Kendall didn't get what he wants. I mean, it's interesting that you never see Logan, despite the fact he's a monster and he's terrible to the world and almost anyone who knows him. He's never actually physically violent, although it does say that he was physically violent to Roman when Roman was a child. But Logan can get what he wants through his force of authority. Kendall, he wants to be the successor, but he doesn't have that authority. He's reduced to physically hurting people to get what he wants. This is related to how Hannah Arendt once described violence as the absence of authority. It's not. Authority is what you use to get your way without violence. So Logan has authority, Kendall doesn't. Obviously, it's different because Logan is quite emotionally violent in that he emotionally abuses his children and the people around him, but at the same time he has that authority and implicit authority of an authority figure, whereas Kendall doesn't. And I think the fact that he's reduced to physically hurting Roman at the end is kind of illustrating that.
I think, yeah, even before that, but he's reduced to just shouting, "I'm the eldest boy," or whatever it was. It's pretty illustrative of the fact that his natural authority, what little of it he has dissolved.
Yeah, he's not his father, that's the thing, which is one of the reasons why he fails.
Yep, tough shit, Ken.
Yeah. And then there's also Greg, who has
He's also in it.
Yeah, who becomes a piece of shit. He's definitely the most obvious. He starts out as a really innocent character and sells his soul. Tom describes him at the end as a piece of shit, and yeah, Greg is really, he's lost all redeeming features. It is kind of sweet at the end how Tom is like, "I got you, Greg," because they're both the outsiders that no one likes and undervalues. but also at the same time, Tom's keeping Greg around because he bullies and abuses him and wants to keep him close because Tom is insecure and a bullying victim, so he also is a bully himself.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's that sweet. I mean, it feels like Tom is probably gonna, if anything, treat Greg even more shittily than he previously has to punish Greg for sort of betraying him in the final episode.
Yeah, but it's kind of a weirdly double-edged sword, I feel. When he goes, I got you, there's a moment of genuine, I don't know, connection between the two, but there's also a moment of Tom is just going to make Greg's life forever misery because Tom is a nasty bully.
Well, yeah, it's the weird thing throughout the series of the most sincere relationship. I don't know if I want to use the word healthy, but the relationship Tom seems most comfortable in is this relationship he has with this underling. But he also, repeatedly bullies and abuses that underling.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I think Tom is one of the best studies I've seen in fiction of a bully because he's not the dominant, the strongest, the biggest chimpanzee in the cage. That's not what bullies are. The people who make the best bullies are the people who have also been bullied a lot themselves. And Tom is classic. He gets bullied by Logan, he gets bullied by Kendall, he gets bullied by his wife, and he bullies Greg and his other underlings as a result of that. I think it's very well observed piece of writing on dysfunctional human relationships.
I mean, Succession, another reason why it could potentially risk becoming repetitive is that Succession is one of these shows that has quite a bleak view of human nature, in view of people having these cycles and bad habits and personality flaws that they just fall back on again and again, much as they might try to break the cycle. And the upside of those shows is they're often very well written and very well observed, and admittedly it's got a bleak view of human nature, but it's not arguably inaccurate for a lot of people. The downside of those shows is that seeing people just fall into the same cycles and make the same mistakes again and again and again and again and again can get a bit repetitive over the course of seasons and seasons and seasons. I watched all of 6 Feet Under in fairly short period of time a few years ago, possibly about 10 years ago now, but anyway. And that's another show has characters with very well observed and well dramatised flaws, but by the time you've watched 5 solid seasons in a couple of months of them just doing the same stupid things again and again and again, it does get a bit repetitive.
Yeah, I mean, you're completely right, and that's why, you're exactly right that this is the right point to end it at. The show is well balanced in the sense of whenever it gets particularly bleak about human nature, there'll be a moment of, genuine connection and warmth. Even Logan, who was a monster and a bully and a brute, he would occasionally say nice things about his children, or occasionally show that he loves them in his own quite gruff, austere way. It's not entirely just a catalogue of human misery. There's always a chink in there that makes you think that maybe there is something nice about this, or these people can do good. But obviously the problem is that gets your hopes up and it makes it even more devastating when they're just going to betray and abuse each other again.
Yeah, no, as I say, that's the Succession cycle. Maybe this one's okay. Oh no.
Yeah, but it does mean it's a brilliant show because they keep that whole thing on the rails until the end and manage to get more drama than I thought really physically possible out of that finale. So yeah, on that sense, I bow down to you, Jesse Armstrong, creator of Peep Show, writer of Strange Lines, master of Succession.
Yeah, great work. Really took the Peep Show thing and successfully turned it into a grim drama. Fair play.
Yeah.
Well done. Great show.
With the odd Peep Show lines such as, tonight you're busted back down to Greg, or you've got watery eggs in your eyes, in your skull for eyes, or something like that. Just things that you only expect in Peep Show.
I haven't quite memorised Peep Show to the extent you have, so I'll take your word for it.
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please leave us a review in your podcatcher of choice to spread the word. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, to find other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And you can also go to our social media, which is MFV Podcast on Twitter or Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook, where you can find out about the films Alistair has seen at Sci-Fi London Film Festival, apparently, and also other things such as our latest episodes. And you can find more from me at nickbryan.com or nickmb on Twitter, or you can back my latest Kickstarter comic, Stone Cop, which, as of the release of this episode, has about 2 or 3 hours left. So I say you can. If you listen to this episode very promptly, you can. Please do. You can find more from me at my website, which is redtrainblog.com, and you can find more from me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball. You can join us next time on this podcast, where we will be eating our friends in the snow in yellow jackets, and then killing Nazis in Sisu. Join us for that in 2 weeks' time. Until then, goodbye. Bye.